All right, so as you already mentioned, I'm Allison. I work for Foresight Institute, which is a nonprofit organization for technologies of fundamental importance for the human future. We focus on AI, cybersecurity, and nanotechnology. And in the next 40 minutes, I would like to give you like a brief executive briefing on the state of AI safety. And this really won't be exhaustive. After all, we only have 40 minutes. But if you want more of a deep dive, then please go to existentialhope.com, which is where I try to collect all work towards positive futures. If you go on AI in cyberspace, this work will be for AI in cyberspace, but I collect all types of work that is towards better futures, including biotech and nanotech, longevity, space travel, and so on and so forth. So this is a more comprehensive outlook than just AI. But for now, let's start with AI, right? So this talk today will be divided in 3 different sections. I'll first go over relevant definitions. Then I'm going to focus on the 3 fields in AI safety, which are value alignment, cybersecurity, and coordination. And I will show why each field contains a number of really hard problems that we have to solve. And then finally, I'll introduce a novel approach to AI safety, multipolar AI, that suggests some new novel ways of solving value alignment, cybersecurity, and coordination. All right, let's start with definitions. I think there are many different levels of intelligence one might want to be concerned with, including narrow, general, and superintelligence. And there are many different entities one may want to classify according to those levels, including non-human animals, machine intelligences, humans, and perhaps even corporations of civilization. I will come back to this slide later to introduce the multipolar approach to AI safety. For now, I only want you to take away one thing, which is most people and organizations use different definitions for different entities. And arguably, much of confusion could be avoided if people would be clearly about the definition that they're using. All right, so if you're interested in a deep dive in AI definitions, then please go to my talk on AI safety and definitions of intelligence, which is at bit.ly/AI definitions. But generally, when we speak about artificial intelligence, it's not so much the artificiality that we're concerned with or that we find promising, but it's the intelligence part. So let's use this working definitions here for intelligence, which is the problem-solving ability using resources. And much of the talk will be focused on intelligence that can generalize over a wide variety of problems, because this is the level that poses unprecedented promises and risks. But as we saw with the last talk here, and as you've probably saw throughout the sessions today, incredible intelligence is arguably already incredibly risky on a narrow level with things like algorithmic bias and so on and so forth. So I'm hoping that some of the things that I'm saying will also generalize to narrow intelligence, which is what most people here are working on. So let's talk about the safety of those systems. Well, as I said, I think AI safety can be broken down to 3 main areas, which is value alignment, cybersecurity, and coordination. Value alignment really asks, how do we align artificial intelligences with what we as humans value? This needs to answer 2 questions. First, what is it that humans actually value? And then how do we communicate this to a silicon-based AI that doesn't share our cultural context? This is only value alignment. Then there's also cybersecurity. So this answers the question of like, well, even if we could communicate our values to an AI, how do we ensure that it reliably executes what we communicate to it? And this seems like an easy task, but getting the cybersecurity foundations right is actually harder than it looks. And then finally, coordination assumes that we will take some time to figure out value alignment and cybersecurity. So it would be useful if the actors who are building those intelligence systems would coordinate to ensure that the agents that we're building function reliably and safely. So this is just a quick rundown. Let's go into a deep dive into every one of them. Let's start with value alignment. All right. So one may think that as AIs become increasingly intelligent, they will also become increasingly moral. So perhaps there's no need anymore, really, to align emergent entities with human values, because intelligence corresponds with morality. Well, that would be really nice, right? But there's no particular reason to think that. And in fact, there are 2 principles, the orthogonality thesis and the basic AI drives, that cast doubt on that. For example, the orthogonality thesis states that an AI can really have any combination of intelligence and goal. So this means that AI systems can be incredibly competent and achieving something that other than what we really want. Consider the thought experiment of the paperclip maximizer. Who here knows of that thought experiment? Okay, a couple do. All right. So in this thought experiment, an AI has, for one reason or another, as a goal to maximize paperclips. And it does this really well. So well, in fact, that it tiles up the universe with paperclips and turns everything around it into paperclips. So it is very competent, but at something other than what we really value. And this is a neat thought experiment, but you can extrapolate from this. And apart from the final goals, right, that are misaligned with our values, there's an additional risk of the instrumental goals being misaligned with our values. So regardless of which final goal an AI is set to pursue, most goals really require an agent to maintain its own existence. Stuart Russell calls this, "You can't fetch a coffee when you're dead" theorem. So regardless of what end goal they have, they will probably want to stay alive. Secondly, probably whatever end goal you have, it is better if you have more resources to achieve those goals. So those instrumental goals may lead to obvious problems, right? Because it suggests that intelligences with any goals would not want to be shut down and would strive to acquire more resources to be able to obtain their final goals better, whether or not those goals are aligned with humans or not. So aligning AIs with human values really is so hard that Eliezer Yudkowsky urges us to set the bar really low. So he says that most difficulty in AI alignment is in fact contained in making a strawberry from scratch that is similar to a real strawberry at the cellular level without destroying the universe. This sounds sci-fi, and it sounds like on the surface it doesn't have anything to do with morality and values, but it's already difficult enough because an AI would have to invent its own biotech, and there's many ways it could do that, right? And there's many ways it could do that that are not aligned with our values. For example, it could prevent itself from being shut down, or again, it could turn humans into resources to make strawberries from. So I think there's already a lot of good work on the technical aspects of value alignment. But I think it's often neglected that humans don't agree on what our values are. What really is it that an AI ought to do and not to do? And I actually think this is a bigger problem than is generally acknowledged. This is why I'll spend some considerable time on this now. It's my philosophical background, and ethics has been going on for over thousands of years. And there's no real agreement on what our values are. So I'll quickly run over a few general approaches to values and show that they're all pretty problematic. This is basically a run-through of an undergrad ethics class, and there's much more to be said on the different values. If that's what you're looking for, then please see my talk on AI philosophy, state of the art at South by Southwest. For now, we'll keep it really brief. All right. So what I'll do is I'll mention the approach to ethics one may want to uphold, here evolution, then an example of how one may want to implement this in an AI system, and then an objection that shows the limitations of this moral approach. Okay, so human values can be viewed through two different lenses, bottom-up and top-down lenses. Let's start with the bottom-up lens. So according to bottom-up values, our values emerge organically in a bottom-up fashion through our evolutionary past, for example, or by cultural socialization. So let's start with evolution, right? So evolutionary game theorists and evolutionary psychologists show that the roots of some of our human principles can be traced back to our evolutionary history. For example, Brian Skirms, who works in evolutionary game theory, he shows that the 50-50 split is a robust strategy in resource distribution problems. And this robust strategy is evolutionarily stable, so this could explain our fairness norms of an equal split today. And that suggests that if only we could simulate our evolutionary past well enough, perhaps our moral values would naturally arise in AIs. And evolution strategy is actually a machine learning optimization strategy that is based on the ideas of evolution, and it uses mutation and selection as search operators. Here, it's, for instance, OpenAI using evolution strategy to solve 3D humanoid walking in 10 minutes with really good results. Well, evolution strategy may work well for simple tasks like learning, or like learning how to walk, but this strategy is really questionable for teaching morality because the same evolutionary mechanism that gives us our values also gives rise to our biases. For example, evolutionary psychology uncovered a range of biases that we're prone to because of our evolutionary past. One example is the Cinderella effect, by which we neglect our stepchildren. Another effect is the effects of in-group preferences. So we're not really moral by nature, one may argue, so simulating our evolution would mean simulating our biases as well as our values. So here we have as objection the evolutionary biases. Okay, let's move one up. Well, if nature doesn't work, one might say, what about nurture, right? Developmental psychology, for example, shows that a considerable part of our values that we uphold can be traced back to our socialization and enculturation during adolescence. And even Turing, who was one of the founding fathers of AI, proposed that instead of simulating an adult mind, one could simulate a child mind and then subject it to education. A crude approach to socializing AIs has been somewhat tried by Microsoft, using natural language processing with pretty questionable results. I think many of you are familiar with this example, right? So this was Microsoft Thai Twitter robot, who turned from a human lover into a Hitler-supporting racist in no time by being socialized with the community on Twitter. The problem here really is with teaching moral values by enculturating an AI is that there's a wide range of phenomena in our culture that are prevalent that we wouldn't really want an AI to adopt, right? Algorithmic bias is just one big example, and this perhaps on a more toy example, but it's a problem that is not only relevant for later stage AIs, but is already pretty significant right now, right? What you put in is what you get out. So, all right, neither nature nor nurture can reliably bring forth morally okay behavior. We have evolutionary biases that we see here, and we have cultural biases. But, you know, maybe that's not at all surprising, because after all, we never claimed that we're moral by nature or by default. So let's look at explicit ethical theories, right? Let's move from bottom up to top down. Let's go from more bottom-up theories to deontology, consequentialism, and virtue ethics, which say that we should really try to explicitly instruct an AI with explicit ethical theories. Let's start with the theory of deontology. So those are the three main theories in ethics that you do with an undergrad ethics class. Is everyone familiar with those? I'll do a really quick rundown. If you're more interested in this, please go talk to me, because it was basically my life for a really long time. But all right, let's run through this. Let's start with deontology. So according to deontological approaches to ethics, an action is morally right if it's done in accordance with a moral rule. And the most prominent deontological framework is perhaps the Kantian one, right, which requires humans to always act so as to always treat humanity as an end in itself and never merely as a means, because this would fail to respect human autonomy. Without wanting to go too deep into the rabbit hole of Kantian philosophy, because this could take a while, someone has actually tried to implement the categorical imperative into computational logic. So this is just an example of that, but this is a way of how computational logic could be used to implement explicit ethical theories. And recently, however, the whole field of deontology has come under heavy attack by neuroscience, right? Because experiments show that humans don't consistently apply deontological rules across similar situations. Many experiments, like the infamous trolley dilemmas here, suggest that our actions are often triggered by System 1 intuitions, and we only afterwards invent deontological rules to post-rationalize and justify the action that we took in a given scenario. Without wanting to go too deep into the trolley dilemmas either, there's a bunch of literature on that. Joshua Green is a very good one. But so here really the problem with deontology is the utility is the inconsistent rules application by humans. So let's look at consequentialism. Are there any hardcore consequentialists in this room? All right, I thought that at an AI conference I would see more. But contrary to deontology, really consequentialism judges an action not according to an agent's compliance with a rule, but rather according to the outcomes of an action. And since many of you here may be consequentialists, I could talk about this more in the Q&A, but for now, let's just focus on act utilitarianism. There's others like motive utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism as well, but ask me afterwards if you're interested. But according to act utilitarianism, an action is right if it maximizes overall utility, which is often defined as well-being or preference satisfaction. So on the surface, one might think, well, maximizing utility could be implemented fairly well by an AI, for example, in optimization algorithms, right? And optimization algorithms usually minimize or maximize an objective function that is aimed at computing certain target values from a set of predictors. And the problem really is for morality is that setting target values from a set of predictors may work well for easy, narrow optimization problems, but optimizing for utility really would require an AI to first predict the amount of utility produced by each action out of all the possible actions available to an AI, and then compare that well-being produced to alternative actions, and even do interpersonal comparisons between the entities that are involved in their actions. So imagine trying to compare the utility of a human versus another AI that might be affected by an action. This seems really hard, right? So finally, let's move to virtue ethics, and that's the last one in our quick run-through of ethics. So different to the top-down theories, virtue ethics really, different to the other top-down theories of consequentialism and deontology, virtue ethics says an action is right, not if it's in accordance with a moral law or if it maximizes utility, but rather if it flows from a stable character. And Aristotle, the father of virtue ethics, had a couple of values here. For example, prudence, courage, and temperance, right? Well, how may one want to wish to implement this in an AI? Well, there's a technique called inverse reinforcement learning, which is a machine learning technique that derives an agent's reward function from observed behavior. And Stuart Russell, one of the figureheads in AI safety, really proposed that inverse reinforcement learning might be used by agents to observe humans and then attempt to codify and imitate those complex ethical values that humans exhibit in situations without them having to explicitly instruct them. This might be nice, but a lot of experiments in moral psychology in a field called situationism have shown that humans don't really reliably execute and exhibit certain virtues, even in very, very similar situations. So our actions are actually better predicted by whether the weather is good or whether a room smells funnily or not, than by whether or not we execute a certain character trait. So basing an AI's values on observing our values that we exhibit in different situations is really on shaky grounds if we can't even get our act together and act morally consistent across a variety of situations at exhibiting those virtues. So as you can see, really, all of those approaches to values have a variety of normative limitations, whether or not we're able to implement them in an AI, right? I really think of ethics as our ongoing inner negotiation between which intuitions we want to call values and which we want to dismiss as biases. And it's a pretty dynamic process, and we're sometimes making progress, but we're not there yet. Bostrom calls AI safety philosophy with a deadline. But what if we can't make that deadline? Ethics is really hard, but I think it's important. This is why I spoke to it at length here. But let's not forget, it's only one of 3 main components in AI safety. Because even if we converge on an ethical set and would find a way how to communicate this to an AI, to a silicon-based AI that doesn't share our cultural values, then we could still not expect that AI to reliably execute those values if we can't rely on the hardware and software of that AI to be built in reliable foundations. So let's look at possible failure modes. Possible risks of an AI arising from cyber insecurities are exploits, bugs, and breakout. So for exploits, malicious hackers could access the system to sabotage or reprogram an AI. And given the increasing value created by intelligent agents, this is an ever stronger concern, right? Secondly, an unintentional bug could disturb an AI's goal execution. We might sneer at this now when AI is narrow, but given the potential reach of later AIs, a bug could have really catastrophic consequences. And lastly, on a more sci-fi note, an AI could discover and exploit its own vulnerabilities, right, in its own code by reprogramming itself, or by breaking out and gaining access to the internet if you have a confined AI. So it seems pretty important to get cybersecurity right. Let's look at the current state of cybersecurity. Let's look at software and hardware. Well, current software is vulnerable to really an escalating number of attacks, right? No day or no week really passes without another cyber attack being uncovered. From 2016 to 2017 alone, Symantec reported a 10% increase in overall targeted activity, with a 13% increase in vulnerabilities reported. That's not all of them. And then a 29% increase in industrial control systems related vulnerabilities. And those industrial control systems will likely soon have AI automated tasks in them. So this is a risk that is already really important on the near term. And even if we could assume for a second that the software that we're building is secure, there's a hardware supply chain risk that really persists, right? Because secure software doesn't bring you anything if the hardware that it's run on has a trapdoor in it. As the Snowden revelations have shown, it is pretty likely that the NSA served national security letters to a bunch of hardware companies, requiring them to install trapdoors in their system. And the Snowden's revelation were 8 years ago, right? So it's probably much worse now. And back when the Snowden revelations came out, citizens were mostly worried about the NSA spying on them. But we must not forget that the US gets most of its hardware from China. And the problem with respect to defense is really that a multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem is already built on those insecurable foundations. And those are not only insecure, but insecurable. And I think the disturbing thing about cyber risk is that even if we don't develop later stage AI, cybersecurity is already a catastrophic risk in itself. Just as an example, much of our physical infrastructure is based on hackable systems. The electric grid, for example, and then in the future, self-driving cars, autonomous weapons, and they all could be turned to killer threats. If you want more information on cyber risk as a catastrophic risk, Christine Peterson, who founded Foresight Institute, gives a really good brief introduction on this. All right, so as we've seen, value alignment and cybersecurity requires solving really hard problems. And this likely requires time. And it likely requires more time than building otherwise capable systems. So to ensure that ample time can be given to figure out the necessary safety work, we should really try to coordinate as actors building AI to avoid that some race ahead and cut corners on really indispensable safety work. So coordination was a topic of a meeting that I recently held with many AI safety organizations present. Here's one attendee in the front row. And we're still working on the white paper, but it became clear that we must start AI coordination early, given the strong incentives for creating AI. And currently, we're moving in the wrong direction, globally. In July 2017, for example, China's AI State Council issued an AI development plan that set a benchmark of 1.5 trillion USD for the scale of China's AI activity in 2030. And that's a figure that would put China in a world-leading position. So there's probably some potential power shifts on the horizon that we have to learn how to deal with. And this gets exacerbated only by the emerging military competition that is flaming up between China and the US. And this emergent race dynamic is really treacherous to both parties, or to really all parties that would be engaging in races. Because safety research is an integral part of a system, right? If it should function securely. So coordination is really in the interest of all parties if they want their systems to function reliably and securely. It's not something that you can put on top. And fortunately, more and more actors are realizing this. So a step into the right direction, for example, is the Partnership on AI, which many big companies in the US, China, and other countries have already joined. And increased global coordination would not only be a multiplying factor that would benefit AI safety, but it may even have collateral benefits for dealing with other existential risks, for example, biotech risk, and other risks on a global scale that we have to learn how to deal with. I think that coordination is very important. And coordination is so critical, in fact, that the journal Big Data and Cognitive Computing has devoted a whole special issue to coordination and strategy, which Roman Yampolsky and I are guest editing. And I'm really happy to announce that for the first time now, the submissions are open. So if you are working on a paper or research that is about AI safety, especially about AI coordination, consider submitting it. The link is bit.ly/AI coordination, or just type in the title above in Google and you'll find it. Submissions are open now, and the deadline is January 31st in 2019. If you have questions, feel free to contact me about it. But as we've seen really here, is that in traditional AI safety, right, all of those fields are really hard to solve, right? And so I would now like to take the remaining 10 minutes or so to introduce a novel approach to AI safety, which is multipolar AI. And this is an alternative approach to AI safety, which proposes really novel ways of solving value alignment, cybersecurity, and coordination. And again, this will be a very quick run-through. We're currently writing a book on it, so consider this as a sneak peek. But OK, to recap, traditional AI safety says, in the unipolar version, that it assumes kind of that we slowly move from current narrow AI systems to create a machine superintelligence, and focuses then on making this machine superintelligence on the long run safe, right, and serve human interests. So this is a kind of like a very crude definition of the kind of traditional unipolar AI safety outlook. So let's compare this with a multipolar AI. So while unipolar AI deems the emergent machine intelligences to be the relevant intelligence, multipolar AI proposes to treat civilization as the relevant superintelligence, and to slowly include the emergent machine intelligence into this larger superintelligence in a multipolar fashion. So here we're back to the definition slides from the beginning, right? How can civilization be superintelligent? Well, in the beginning, we defined intelligence as problem-solving ability given resources. And under that definition, civilization taken as a whole is already a superintelligence, because it is already composed of human intelligences and machine intelligences. It can solve vastly more problems than any human or any machine intelligence alone. And its intelligence arguably is increasing at an exponentially accelerating rate. So if we accept this funny idea that civilization is the relevant superintelligence, then we should rely on this highly evolved mechanism rather than trying to replace it with a novel machine intelligence. So if we ever develop the ability to create a single machine intelligence that could replace civilization, we should rather use that ability instead to create multiple instantiations of this machine intelligence within the larger superintelligence of civilization. All right, so if we accept for a moment the thought that civilization is a superintelligence, what would this mean for value alignment, cybersecurity, and coordination? Well, let's start with value alignment. So traditional AI safety, to remind you, postulates that a machine intelligence will perform a unitary takeover and then attempts to make that intelligence serve human interests. But as we've seen, what it means to serve human interests is a question that is really not dealt with yet in moral philosophy. So rather than putting these hard questions between us and safety, we should seek to enshrine the emergent intelligences into the existing superintelligence of civilization, because it already serves our interests. Granted, civilization as a whole doesn't want anything. It doesn't have a utility function. But insofar as it is composed of humans like you and I, who perform voluntary interactions with each other that mutually benefit us, civilization at least already serves our interests. And not every interaction that you and I perform with each other will serve both of our interests. So this mechanism isn't perfect, but civilization as a whole tends, at least imperfectly, to climb Pareto-preferred paths. And we have survived so far and in better ways. The decrease in poverty here is just one factor, but similar slides can be shown for the decrease in violence. So civilization is really a mechanism that serves our interests fairly well over time. So let's strengthen this highly evolved mechanism of civilization rather than trying to replace it. Doing such a thing would avoid the question of value alignment, because rather than trying to create one entity and aligning those entities' goals with human values, we propose to create many intelligent entities that serve different goals and that interact in a voluntary fashion with each other and keep each other in check. Well, if we think that such a multipolar system could be possible, how can we ensure that it is built on secure cyber foundations? Okay, consider an analogy from evolution, the genetic takeover. So genetic takeover is a term used in biology to describe the mechanism by which evolution produced change in the genetic substrates of organisms over time. So in a genetic takeover, a simple organism here with a primary genetic substrate G1 produces a novel secondary genetic substrate G2 over time as a result of its metabolic processes. And over time, the secondary genetic substrate is inherited and comes to really carry inheritable traits itself, right? And at first you can see both kind of coexist with each other. But gradually the secondary substrate, G2, replaces the primary as the main genetic material for the organism, and the organism evolves to a new level of evolution. So this theory of genetic takeover is a theory of evolution, right? It's from biology, but it could be used really as an analogy for cybersecurity as well. Because just like today's high technology mechanisms of heredity may have evolved out of simple organisms, so a secure cybersecurity system may evolve out of our current foundations. So to evolve out of our current insecurable cyber foundations, we must develop a novel system within it that can coexist with it and be competitive with it until it eventually outcompetes it and then takes over and becomes the dominant system. And we currently even see a promising example for this, which is the blockchain ecosystem. One reason our current system still is vulnerable is that it's not hostile enough. So companies and institutions can really survive even though they're based on insecurable foundations. But in contrast to that, the Bitcoin and Ethereum ecosystems, both projects are evolving in an ecosystem that is already under really hostile attack pressures. You all know about the 2016 DAO exploit, and that's just one case in point, right? And while the DAO exploit was arguably not handled in a way that gives stability for a long-term blockchain ecosystem, most of the time when such losses exist in the blockchain ecosystem, often actors have no recourses to compensate for the losses that are created. So those losses are really real. And this means that systems that are not bulletproof will be killed early and visibly in a blockchain-based ecosystem. And therefore, the ecosystems that remain, the ecosystem only remains populated by bulletproof systems. So if this type of secure blockchain-based ecosystem grows enough before the world is subject to large-scale cyber attacks, then perhaps a genetic takeover might be achieved by which the secure cybersecurity system first coexists in tandem with our current system, which it already is starting to emerge, before gradually bridging from our current system to a more secure one. So the hope here really is that the current system can be completely discarded once the superior high technology alternative has been fully evolved within it. In the same way that here evolution does it, or in the same way that a spaceship discards of its booster rocket as dead weight once it's out. So this is a pretty exciting time, and there is a big role to play, I think, for blockchain enthusiasts in this decentralized world model. If you are one of them, feel free to email me if you want more information on this approach. But generally, to avoid, as we've seen now, to avoid the hard questions in value alignment and in cybersecurity, what I've tried to walk you through is this safety mechanism that relies on a multitude of entities with different goals that keep each other in check. Well, how exactly would this coordination work? How exactly would such a system of checks and balances between those multitude of entities could be created? Well, I think we can take the Constitution of the US as an example to create a system of checks and balances as coordination mechanism. In the Constitution, the division of power serves a clear purpose, right? James Madison said that if angels were to govern man, no controls on government would be necessary. But in framing a government which is to be administered by man over man, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place to oblige it to control itself. So I think we can look at the system of the Constitution as a precedent to build a system of checks and balances that accommodates emergent intelligences and prevents the rule of a unitary machine superintelligence. And given that the chances are pretty low that we'll create a perfect angel, I think we'll have more success by strengthening our existing system and creating a multipolar world that makes it in everyone's interest to rearrange and to form coalitions when one party becomes too prominent. I think that the fact that memes can control memes also suggests that AI systems can control AI systems. But how stable would such a system be, right? Given the strong economic incentives of creating AI, can we even prevent actors on a long-term time horizon from centralizing the intelligence of their entities and from becoming one dominant intelligence instead? I think maybe. The Constitution was created 250 years ago, and it's still relevant today, right? Even though our system has changed tremendously in ways that were unforeseeable by the Founding Fathers. And for now, we don't have to solve the whole problem. We just have to create the starting conditions. Because just like the Founding Fathers, when crafting the checks and balance system of the constitutions, knew that eventually that had to be reiterated by future intelligences like us, the system that we have to create to make AI safe will also have to be reiterated by future intelligences. So this was a quick walkthrough of that multipolar approach to AI. If you're interested in the more technical aspects of this approach or of learning more about it generally, then I suggest you check out a talk that is pretty quick on civilization as relevant superintelligence by Mark Miller and myself on bit.li/superintelligent civilization. Or if you want to really deep dive into it, then I suggest you check out the paper that we wrote on it on decentralized approaches to reducing risks. That can be accessed under bit.li/decentralized AI. Finally, I don't claim to have solved any of the problems in value alignment, cybersecurity, and coordination, right? This new approach, multipolar AI, really needs development. But please note that the caliber of problem that we're dealing with multipolar AI is a very different one of traditional safety. Because rather than trying to solve moral philosophy and then instructing this to a non-human AI, which is alien territory, multipolar AI really focuses on strengthening an already existing system, which is the highly evolved system of civilization. And we already have plenty of experience in dealing with that one. Okay. Last slide. This was 40 minutes of a mouthful, really. And we barely scratched the surface. But to finish, here I summarize a few ways that could be starters if you want to engage more, either with AI safety, multipolar AI, or with Foresight Institute, which is the institute that I work for. So if you're interested in learning more about AI safety generally and getting up to speed, then I suggest you go on existentialhope.com and check out the section on AI in cyberspace, which is where I collect most good work on AI safety that I come across. If you are already working on AI safety and would like to submit your own work, especially if it's focused on coordination, then please go to bit.li/AI coordination and submit your work there, or contact me if you have questions. If you want to find out more about the multipolar approach to AI safety, then read the paper that I just mentioned on decentralized approaches to reducing existential risks, or watch the shorter talk. I promise you won't regret it. I think it's a pretty radical but truthful talk by Mark Miller, who's a Foresight Senior Fellow. And then lastly, if you're interested in the work that I'm doing at Foresight Institute, then please go on foresight.org or join our community and gatherings at bit.li/Foresight list. This is our community mailing list. We have monthly gatherings, and I don't only focus on AI safety, but we do a lot of technical work in nanotechnology and longevity. This Saturday, Sunday, I'm hosting a workshop on nanotechnology for longevity, but we also have open to the public monthly salons. This year, I'm focusing them on strengthening civilization, so we tackle different aspects of civilization at a time. And finally, we have our annual conference coming up in December, and I'm hoping to release tickets next week. If any of this seemed interesting to you, or you want to find out more, also feel free to contact me directly at a@foresight.org. Finally, I really want to thank you all. I hope this was useful. I know it was a lot. and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks a lot.